Hello, class, and welcome to Interviewing Techniques. This is week 4 of our course where we will be focusing upon reflective listening. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I am your instructor for this course. So, today we will explore really one of the most transformative skills in any counselor's toolbox, what we call reflective listening. Now, this isn't just about repeating what a client says, although, sure, that's part of it. It's about helping clients to hear themselves more clearly. That's really what our goal is, to help our clients hear themselves more clearly. Because clients listen to themselves, and what they say is obviously important to them, so there's some saliency determination that is automatic with them. So reflective listening is the heart of building trust and deepening conversations with a client. It signals to the client, I am with you, I understand you, you matter, I am willing to enter your world and accept your world. And it also helps move the conversation forward, especially when clients feel stuck or when they feel unheard. Now, when a client feels heard because you are reflecting back what they are saying, they feel more comfortable continuing on in the exploration process. So, a little bit of a guide for this week's lecture. There are always a story, and this week I will be focusing on the story of someone that provided some transformative work for reflective listening. We'll then dive into the role of reflection in building trust and building rapport. We'll then dive into what are the core reflective listening techniques. There are lots of different techniques, but what are some core techniques that we can practice? And finally, we'll explore some common pitfalls that can come about in our listening, or in the way or how we listen, so that we can be mindful of those and try to avoid those. Now, as always, I like to start off with a little story about someone, and this story is about Thomas Gordon, born in 1918, died in 2002. He was a clinical psychologist and also a student of the founder of person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy. So he was the student of Carl Rogers. What Thomas Gordon did throughout his career was he popularized active listening. But not just that. Using active listening in combination with conflict resolution techniques. And he built a career on helping parents and teachers and leaders to listen actively and to solve conflicts, to bring about resolution to conflicts through listening. What a groundbreaking idea. We call this now, because of Thomas Gordon, we call this the Gordon model for conflict resolution, where he laid the groundwork for using our communication skills. And so now this is a fairly common approach in counseling as well as in education. Now, Gordon emphasized the value of reflective responses over reactive responses. So, in other words, he advocated for understanding and empathy, for being able to live in the other person's lived world and not allowing your own lived world to be pulled out of shape because of what the other person is saying or try to defend your own lived world. Rather, he advocated for understanding and empathy. Once you enter the other person's lived world, you can understand their point of view, and that can start to resolve the conflict and encourage growth. And so his legacy lives on in the listening strategies that we're going to use today. So I hope you really appreciate how powerful being an active, reflective listener is and how it can transform a conflict. And we know this because of Thomas Gordon. So, what is reflective listening? Well, I used to have my grad students practice. One of the first times that they would start would be, really, tell me more. And they would just practice those phrases. And they would kind of take it as a bit of a joke because it felt kind of unnatural, but it really is the key to reflective listening. Reflective listening, though, is more than nodding your head and saying, It's about intentional act of mirroring a client's thoughts, of mirroring a client's feelings, and the meanings in your own words. So it creates clarity and it creates emotional resonance between you and the client. And so this technique encourages clients to elaborate, to rethink, and to also feel validated. It can de-escalate tension when someone feels defensive. It can illuminate when the client feels like they don't know what's going on in their own life. And it really kind of it's about finding what lies beneath the actual words that the client initially uses to what is deeper that is motivating the client. Simply by listening, you are using a philosophical term, unconcealing the meanings that are hidden even to the client themselves. So it's a bit of a magical process, really, when you think about it, being able to be a good reflective listener. Now, there are some core skills of reflective listening, and I want you to practice these throughout the week. When you are having conversations with people, don't talk at people like you normally do. Listen to people. Reflectively listen to people and discover just how deep your relationships will go based upon this. Now, there's several layers or several levels of reflection, and they range from fairly simple things to more complex things. So we can start off with a simple reflection. A simple reflection is repeating or slightly rephrasing what the client said. So the client might say, I'm so tired of drinking. And you could simply reflect back, you're really tired of drinking. That's a simple reflection. Then you could do a complex reflection where you are inferring meaning and emotion or motivation behind the client's words. Okay? You're diving a little bit deeper, and in so doing, the client can also either acknowledge that you want to go deeper or might clarify for you. That's another thing. Then there's something called the double-sided reflection. And remember, I've already introduced that to you in this course. The double-sided reflection is where you are capturing ambivalence. I want to do this, but I also want that. So you're looking at both sides of a client's internal conflict. And that can be extremely powerful. And of course, that is one of the key points to change within a counseling relationship. You need to find that ambivalence. And then finally, amplified reflection, where you exaggerate the client's statement just slightly in order to promote reconsideration. Okay? You want to be careful with this. You want to be cautious with this. But if somebody is pushing in a certain direction and it doesn't make a lot of sense, then maybe you exaggerate that direction a little bit more in your reflection back. And maybe they'll stop and go, whoa, wait a second, that's crazy. And then you can go, well, okay, well, talk about that. Why is that crazy? If this is the direction that you're pulling. And then they can start to clarify, and that will help them to gain some clarity on their own ambivalence and maybe to where to go as far as good choices. Remember, in your reflective listening, though, it's not just about the questions. It's about tone. How are you using your voice? Go slow, go low, go soft. It's with your body language. Your body is open. You're not crossing that midline. You're very relaxed and slow in your movements. And it's about timing. Be timeful with your reflections. Don't rush anything. All of that will influence how that reflection lands, and that is key. Now, of course, there are things that we call attending behaviors, which can also be important. So, how you sit shows how important this conversation is, the kind of eye contact you give. Don't stare at them in the eye constantly, but at the same time, don't be facing the other direction or looking at your phone. Eye contact and having that connection can be very powerful to create that social bond that we need. Facial expression. Okay? A good, caring facial expression that isn't grimacing at what they're saying is important. And also silence. Go slow and allow for silence. Silence works just as well as words oftentimes. And when the client is ready to speak, the client will speak. So you want to face the client without distractions. You want to nod or give small verbal cues. You want to use open, non-defensive posture. And you want to allow for silence, not rushing in, but allowing things to proceed at a comfortable, safe pace. Remember that reflective listening requires presence. You can't be multitasking and doing a bunch of other things and still establish a meaningful connection with the person. You only have 100 bits of information to use in your own conscious space. Use it well by focusing on the client and establishing a meaningful connection with the client. Now, another thing that you want to do, of course, is to encourage the client to explore their lived world. And when clients feel understood, they tend to open up more. So reflective listening creates a safe space for them to explore their thoughts and their feelings. So good reflections encourage deeper responses. So for example, you feel like you're failing, even though you're trying really hard. Or you're not sure if this change is even worth it anymore. Those kinds of reflections invite. They don't direct that conversation. They invite for other parts to be drawn up. And that is important. Invite, don't direct. The other thing to be mindful of is to avoid judgment and advice. It's very easy for new counselors to fall into the trap of simply trying to fix or to advise too quickly. Yes, you can give some psychoeducation, but that's slow and it's part of this whole process. It's not about giving advice. It's not about fixing. It's about reflectively listening, and that requires some restraint. A mature, wise counselor will go slow and be patient because they know that's what works. If a client says, I hate how much I drink. Avoid responding with advice like, well, then you should go to rehab. Instead, do something like this. You're feeling really frustrated with your drinking. See the difference? You're not fixing something. You're not giving advice. You're not directing. You are acknowledging the feeling. You are moving in the first steps towards finding that ambivalence that's innate within the person. And that moment of reflection helps the client feel seen, which builds trust. And trust and safety, remember, are keys to the process of success within recovery. So let's take a look at some practice examples in reflective listening. So let's say the client were to say something like, I keep saying I'll stop using, but I always come back. I want it. And the counselor might respond with something simple like, you feel stuck in a cycle that you feel like you can't break. Not giving any advice, simply reflecting back. Or the client says, everyone's mad at me. And you as a counselor might say, you're feeling isolated. And maybe you're feeling misunderstood. And so these kinds of reflections deepen that emotional quality of the conversation. And that builds connection. That helps the client, first off, to recognize that you are in their lived world already, and that you're not making a mess of it. You're not judging it. You are simply enjoying their presence. And it's at that point where they can start to think about cleaning up their lived world a little bit, because now they have company. So that's something to kind of think about. Some common pitfalls, though, in reflective listening is overusing reflections, and where you're kind of making it feel like it's robotic. You still want to have other techniques that you use, not just simply reflecting, although reflecting is extremely powerful. So the other thing to be mindful of is to not use judgmental tones or condescending tones. You want things to remain positive. Relax your voice, keep it calm. As soon as you tense up your voice, you sound judgmental, you sound condescending, even though that probably isn't your intent. But it can happen on a subconscious level. So it takes some deliberate practice. You might want to jump ahead to conclusions that the client hasn't stated yet. Remember, you're going slow. You're going at the client's pace. They get to lead. You don't get to rush off to the end. The other thing is mistaking reflection for agreement. You don't have to agree with what the client is saying or with their ambivalence or the direction they're going. That's part of their autonomy. And that's one of the challenges that sometimes new counselors have. Reflecting is simply you are in their world and you're acknowledging their world. That's what it is. It's not accepting, it's not agreeing with everything that's there. It's not saying it's all good. That's a very simplistic way of thinking. It's instead acknowledging. The goal isn't just to parent the client. The goal is to understand the client. The goal is to respond to the client with care. Now, some terms that I've used here that maybe it'd be good to repeat and reflect upon would be things like, when I talked about simple reflection, that's something important for us to be mindful of here. Remember that is restating the client's message. What has the client just said? Maybe with a little bit of variation to it. That is a simple reflection. A complex reflection would be where you are reflecting back, but you're adding a little bit of meaning to it that you assume is there, or adding a little emotion that you assume that the client is alluding to. Now, in that case, it's a little bit of a check to see if the client, you can say, is that correct, my understanding? And then, of course, there's the double-sided reflection. The double-sided reflection is really important in motivational interviewing. Why? Because it acknowledges both sides of the client's ambivalence. And again, the easiest one to use an example is someone that's in an addiction. They really want the substance because it makes them feel like they can cope. So they do truly want it. But at the same time, they will acknowledge that there's some problems with it, and they want also a good life that is not possible with this. So there's that ambivalence that goes on, that two-sided struggle. And so the double-sided reflection helps to bring that out. Now, as far as quiz questions, which reflection technique acknowledges both a desire to change and a desire to stay the same? Well, that is the one we just talked about, the double-sided reflection. So, as we close out this lecture, I just want to remind you that reflective listening really is one of the most important skills you'll learn in this course. It takes time to master it, but it's well worth the effort. So I encourage you to practice it in your daily life. So this week, practice listening in order to understand. Not just reply, but to understand. Go slow with your conversations. Try reflecting with someone by saying it in your own words. And just notice how it affects the flow of the conversation when someone says something and then you reflect it back in your own words. Extremely powerful how that can take the conversation deeper almost instantly. And with each reflection, you are telling the client, and remember this, you're telling the client that you matter. I hear you. I am with you. You are not alone. And that message can change everything. Hope you enjoyed this lecture this week. You take care. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.